our agenda, Q12 employee survey results and status. Ms. Grill.
Rebecca Grill, City Administrator. This item is based on a survey that we had given to all employees earlier this year. I have Jenna Bidwell from Carlson Detman Consulting. If you wanna, she's going to be joining us and do a presentation on that for us.
Great, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You do have a copy of the slide deck in front of you, but we did project it because some of the slides get a little full, so you'll be able to see a little bit better up on the screen there. So as Rebecca had said, we have some information that we wanted to share with you regarding the employee engagement survey that was administered. And before we jump into the results of it, I wanted to give you a little bit of background in terms of employee engagement and what we mean when we're talking about that. So I'll just walk you through kind of defining the employee engagement, what it is, why do we care, why are we talking about it. We'll review the tool that we use to measure it. We'll walk through the results then. And then what are the next steps? What's the ongoing process thereafter? So you'll see the tool that we used, as well as throughout this information, will refer to a lot of Gallup's information. And most people know Gallup for their polls. But what they're really most focused on is their research on management practices. And employee engagement is a big part of that. So they have quite an extensive scientific process methodology here when it comes to employee engagement. So what we're really talking about here are those employees who are involved, enthusiastic, and committed to the work. They're contributing to the organization in a positive manner. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about employee engagement, okay? On the contrast, oftentimes you'll hear people use satisfaction kind of interchangeably with engagement. And I wanted to really kind of emphasize the fact that those are two very different things. Someone can be extremely satisfied and not overly productive. It's just kind of the reality of it. And then there are also times when you can be engaged and in that moment you're not satisfied. So it's just important that we recognize when we say satisfied, may or may not be productive. There's a time essence there, but it's really not about energy. And oftentimes it's kind of taking the back seat and waiting to see what may unfold before them, where engaged is what it says here. It's working with a passion, it's performing at high levels, and it's really about driving that innovation within an organization. So you'll see that there's really two different pieces here. And when you're talking about an organization, what you most want to be focused on is that engagement. I mentioned that their research is quite extensive, and I think it's easy to look at some of these things and think that it's a little touchy-feely, and why is this really important? And it's really important to know that all of their research is pointing to these key tangible outcomes that can have a significant impact on an organization. So we're talking about that increased productivity, the reduced safety issues, lower turnover, less absenteeism. So it's got some real tangible bottom line impact to organizations when you take the time to invest in employees' engagement and talking about it and building it into your culture. So that's kind of from the outside. Why is it important, and why are we even going to spend our time talking about it? When we talk about why is it important here, this was one of the things that Rebecca and Audrey Key and myself talked about, and what we looked at was your strategic plan. And specifically within your strategic plan, this notion of the excellence in government, we picked out key statements within that particular goal that can relate directly to employee engagement. So when we're talking about creating that culture of innovation and continuous improvement, you need to have an engaged workforce that's going to be driving that productivity and driving those changes. Increase employee knowledge of organizational operations. It's being in tune with the organization, where it's going, what are the work rules and policies behind them, and how can we be a part of them. The second part of that is that successful implementation. So you're not going to have these successes within your programs if you don't have people connected. and then revise and streamline your hiring, retention, and performance recognition, you can have a world-class system, but if you don't have employees that are engaged, you're not getting the most out of those systems. So it's really about developing your culture, your processes within a really engaged environment. And so all of these things are really working in the same direction and trying to move your strategic plan forward. So the survey itself, a little bit about the particular survey. So there's 13 questions. It's pretty straightforward. One question is on satisfaction, the remaining 12, hence the Q12, is engagement focused. And that's where the bulk of our time and our conversations were with your employees, was questions 1 through 12. The employees had access both electronically and through paper versions. So we were trying to reach as many folks as we could and have this be as easy for them and pain-free as possible. And it was stressed numerous times that it's an anonymous process. It's an anonymous survey. So where there were paper copies available, I was the only one who received those, and I put them into the system that goes directly to Gallup. So nobody here within the city ever had those paper copies. The other part of this anonymity is you'll see that there's breakout reports within this. We needed to have a minimum of 4 people respond in order to have any data provided. So that's how we can ensure that there's no ability to pinpoint and say, Tom, these were your responses for these particular questions. The survey ran for just under a month. It's a little bit longer than we typically do, but with the 4th of July holiday in there, and we were trying to really increase the participation rate, we left it open and had different channels of communication happening throughout that time period to really encourage participation. So there was information provided to the employees through the employee newsletter from Rebecca and the mayor, and then I personally was on site 9 different meetings, 9 different times, different sites, trying to connect with as many folks as we could, providing them information about the survey, but then also administering those paper copies at that point. And then we also had the recorded presentation. So there were many different avenues of getting the communication out, and employees were receiving this from many different media as well. Here are the 12 questions, and I wanted to provide you with this because I do think it's important that you have a little bit of an understanding of these questions. So when I had mentioned before that there's a lot of research behind this, these 12 questions at one point started off at 3,000. So, and there's a lot of science that has gone into this. What they were looking for at those 3,000, as they worked through each of those 3,000 questions, is they were looking for questions that were specific and concise enough to differentiate high-performing teams. So they would ask these questions and then look for a separation of high-performing teams from all others. So you'll see some of these questions. For example, question 4 is about recognition in the last 7 days. It's very specific to say the last 7 days. At one point, that question may have looked something like in the last 2 weeks, in the last 10 days. And it wasn't until it was specific enough to say that I've received recognition or praise in the last 7 days that they saw that differentiation. So these 12 questions are very intentional, and there's a lot of thought and research that goes behind it. Question 10, I have a best friend at work, is probably the most hated question. People don't like that one. It oftentimes doesn't make sense to them. That was another question that one of the variations was, I have someone I trust at work, I have a confidant at work, and again, it wasn't until they raised the threshold and used the term best friend that they saw that differentiation. The other thing to know about these questions is they really are a hierarchy. So questions 1 and 2, we say, are the basic needs. Those are the absolutes that need to be in place. And then you work your way up the questions. So then you focus on the individual, then the teamwork and growth. So if we're working with somebody and wanting to talk about an action plan moving forward, you tend to work from the bottom, establishing those basic needs, and work your way up the 12 questions. Okay?
So that's the order of the questions too.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
exactly. Yep. So, based on the responses of the individual, so they were asked each of these 12 questions, and they had a 5-point scale to say how much they strongly disagreed or strongly agreed with each of the statements. They were basically categorized into 3 different buckets, if you will. So one is an engaged employee, and it's really about having this psychological commitment to the organization. There's this middle bucket of not engaged. So it's they come in, they do the job, and they leave. There's none of that extra discretionary effort put in place. And the third is that actively disengaged. I always say that the best visual for this is you have a school of fish swimming in one direction, you're actively disengaged, or the fish swimming against that. They're undermining every effort you're doing to try to move the organization forward. Okay? So we ended up with an overall report and then multiple group reports. The group reports then were broken out by each of these different subcategories. So we had a department level report for each of the different departments, a manager level report, tenure, age, gender, and education. Those are all captured in your packets. It's important to know that when we look at the manager report or the tenure, it's the people that fall within it. So it's not as though they were asked in specifics to say, how would you respond to these 12 questions about your manager? They were first asked to say, what department do you work in? Who's your manager? What's your tenure? What's your age? What's your gender? And what's your education level? So those types of things just help to filter out which of these sub-reports would that information fall under. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's just a snapshot of the overall engagement index. So on the left you have the cities, and then on the right I wanted to provide you with just some comparison of the current US workforce. So the greenish color is the engaged, and that is, in the general population, it's only sitting at 33% in the US. So you're sitting at 28%, relatively close there. I think that number is oftentimes shocking because I think most people think in general that the workforces tend to be more engaged. And I think when you see that current US workforce, it kind of puts things into perspective that overall that number has been climbing, but it's still relatively low at 33%. The brown color then is you're not engaged, and you're sitting at about 44%. Those are the folks that are really, if you think about it, they're kind of sitting on the fence, and the efforts that you put in moving forward are going to allow you to kind of pull them over the fence and re-engage them into the organization. And then the brown is the actively disengaged. And so there you're sitting a little bit higher than normal. And again, when you think about those definitions, those actively disengaged are those ones that are working against you. And that's some of the struggle that you have because of that. Also to note, our participation rate was at 60%. We struggled to get the participation. And I think one of the big concerns I heard in going through this was the anonymity of it, the confidentiality of it. So I'm feeling more confident now that we've had an opportunity to go out and show the employees the results. They understand the reports a little bit better, that some of those folks that may not have participated before would be more likely to participate moving forward, because now they understand that it really is a group report and you can't single out my own responses in it. So that's one of the things I think that we always have a little bit of a challenge with employees, and that skepticism. And so it's a growing process here in understanding how the reports work and what this process actually looks like.
So you're going to be doing this again?
That's on the next steps. Rebecca has put that in there as a potential to resurvey at the end of 2018.
And then my other comment is, on that 40%, I'm going to guess most of that 40% does not fall in the engaged column either.
The 44% absolutely don't.
No, I'm talking about the 40% who didn't participate.
Right.
Yes.
Correct.
I'm saying of the 40% who didn't show up, most of those are going to be disengaged or even actively disengaged.
And that's a great point because they're included in the overall assessment. So Gallup takes that into consideration. It's not one of the calculations that they share with us, but it is built into this to say there is a factor here in saying that you didn't participate. You're right on you're clearly not engaged if you're not participating.
Even filling out the
So there is that notion there too. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point there. So I do want, this is a lot of information here, but if we want to switch over to your packet, I want to just walk you through reading the reports here. So if we look at just the first page, the overall report, there's a little bit of information here I want to share. So in the upper left-hand corner is the engagement index. So that's sharing that pie chart that I just shared with you. Just below it, there's an engagement index ratio. So it's essentially saying that for every engaged employee you have one actively disengaged employee. So that's a little bit higher than that national number. You'll also then see each of the 12 questions listed with question 00 being that question of overall satisfaction. If we follow the question across then, so for question 1, I know what's expected of me, the overall score was a 4.04. It was a 5-point scale. That's the average response. Average score for I know what's expected of me.
So in answering the question, there's a scale from
1 to
5?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So in parentheses, we see the number 317. We had 317 responses for that particular question. Employees had the opportunity to not answer a question. So you'll notice as you move down, even to question 2, there's 318 responses. So that's why there's that fluctuation. So we can see in parentheses the number of people we had responding. If you follow that 4.04 for question 1 across, you'll see that 6 with that skinny bar of red. That is an external database then that Gallup uses that you can measure against. So this database is a 3-year rolling group, and it's a mixture of organizations, some like yourselves that this is the first time you're doing it, and other organizations who've been focused on engagement for 10 years. It's cross industry, cross size, and it just gives you kind of an external comparison to see. So when we look at this, we say, well, 4.04 on a 5-point scale, that's pretty good. But when you look across to say, well, how does that compare to other organizations? It's in the 6th percentile. So 94% of organizations are scoring higher on that particular question. Now, the other thing to kind of keep in mind with this is question 1 is in that basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's an expectation that everybody should know what's expected of them. So that's part of, in understanding and reading through this, where we'll look at, for example, question 5, my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me. That's a lower average score of 3.68, but it's in a slightly higher percentile. And again, that just goes back to that's that hierarchy. And so it takes a bit more at the bottom of the pyramid to push those numbers higher into that external ranking. The other number I want to just point out is this number here, the 3.44. So this is a grand mean. It's an average of all the averages for each of your 12 questions. And just below that, it tells us that a 3.44 is in the 5th percentile in that comparison group. Okay. Some of the color coding here, just to be aware of. So for this one, they are red, but as you look through the different reports, you'll see some different colors in that percentile group on the far right side. That's just broken out by thirds. So when you see red, it's kind of the greatest opportunity for some focus and for some improvement. When you see some of that gold or yellowish color, it's falling in that 33 to 66th percentile. The way to interpret that is to say there's something happening there. There's some things in place. We need to maybe do a little bit of conversations need to be had to figure out what's happening. And then where you see the green, that's above the 66th percentile. And those are areas of strength. you have some good things in place. So as you look through some of those other reports, you'll see that variation in color.
So these comparisons you said are across industries?
Yes.
So
It's a complete mix.
you don't have it broken out by, say, government?
We
only?
don't, no. You can, there's additional fees related, and of course, for different amounts of money,
We
you
can
can
pay
have.
more and find out more. I
Exactly,
get it.
exactly. But for the time being, I think that it gives you enough of a reference to show you where you have opportunities, and as you continue to grow, that may be something you would want to look at, say in 3 to 5 years, maybe. But I think for the time being, you've got enough to focus on initially, to give you some guidance there. But yes, there's some additional breakout information that you could go to. Any questions on kind of that overall report and how to read it? No? Okay. Then I just want to point out a little bit different than on the following, any of the following breakout reports then. So if we just look at the next page, the back of that one, these then are the group reports. And so the header at the very top is going to tell you the group. So on that next page, you'll see it's the title of the engagement survey, summer 2017, and then it says age. So we know that this report then falls into that age group report. And then the header on the far right side, just above the 3.76, tells us which of those options within that group report are we looking at here. So for example, the age group was broken out by generations, because we wanted to see how the different generations look within the workplace. So this is your millennial report. So this is your 34 years and younger. And the only real difference here with the group reports is the center column will provide you with the overall number, and then to the right of that will show you that group report number. So you don't have to flip back and forth. So for example, question 1, I know what's expected of me, 4.04 for the overall city, 4.28 for this group. So they seem to know a little bit more about what's expected of them. And that's coming in at the 37th percentile in that external database. Does that make sense? Okay. So these results then were shared with all of the managers the beginning of September. We sat down and walked through exactly what we just did here, and how to read this and how to interpret it and understand the information given to you. We then did rollout meetings in their areas. I was a part of most of those, and helped the managers facilitate state of the team conversations, and I'll share a little bit more with you about that in just a minute here. But we were pushing that out and got the information out to most staff then through the months of September and October. So it's most effective to share the results as quickly as you can, while it's still fresh in their minds and they remember why they may have answered things the way they did. So I was a part of those meetings, and then Audrey Key was a part of most of those meetings as well in helping facilitate those conversations. So the state of the team is what we call those rollout meetings, and essentially the focus of them is kind of twofold. It's one, to educate them on the results, get the results back in front of them and share the information with their staff. But then it's also to start to begin this dialogue and talk about not only the results, but where are we going as a department. So talking about some performance goals and trying to identify how can we focus on some of these engagement items, whether it's, let's pick on the first one of I know what's expected of me. Is it establishing expectations more formally, that we're missing out on this opportunity to communicate, and so that's leaving things a little cloudy for employees? Or question 2 is about material and equipment. So are we making sure that we're touching base to make sure you have what you need to be successful in your job? I'm asking you to do something and you don't have the tools you're not going to be able to be successful. So it was about identifying what of these engagement items can we focus on that help us in our performance efforts. And then the idea is that you come back to this and you review and you recalibrate, because things change and priorities change. So as a team and as a department, you want to be revisiting this and keeping this alive through your conversations on a monthly basis or so. Just saying, you know, are there things that we need to change? Are we making any efforts in some of these areas? You guys understand what's expected of you. Can we move forward and talk about some of these other items moving forward? I did put on here, it's really important to know that just taking the assessment and measuring it isn't enough. We need to take action. And honestly, if you were to conduct an employee engagement survey and then do absolutely nothing, I would guarantee that your engagement surveys, the results are going to tank in response to that. So it really is about, what are you doing with the information? What kind of conversations and dialogues are coming out of this information, and what are you doing with it? Okay. So the ongoing expectations and awareness, do you want to jump in here,
Sure.
Rebecca?
So as we move along, going forward, we're going to be continuing to discuss and expand the understanding about what employee engagement is and how it relates to accomplishing our goals. I think people are starting to understand the difference between the satisfaction versus the engagement. It does take some reiteration for that understanding. We also have to have a realization that we didn't get to this place overnight, and so changes aren't going to occur overnight. We'll be working with various teams in the departments to implement a plan for improvement and goals of 2 or 3 of the items. You obviously don't want to focus on everything, because then you won't get anything done. It's too big of a focus. Make sure that the managers and employees hold each other accountable for movement towards the goal, and then have ongoing discussions. A lot of this employee engagement is really about communication, just talking, instead of an employee and a manager meeting once a year to talk about a performance review. Let's talk about things on a regular basis. So that's discussing the progress, and then I'm really working with our executive team members to model all of those items listed previously, so we can demonstrate to the rest of the organization the behavior that we're looking for. And then, as indicated previously by Jenna, we'll do a resurvey at the end of 2018 to see if we've made any movement in that. And I'm not sure what your experience was with resurveying, but I was reading some items where sometimes the result of this is the engaged people become even more engaged, and the disengaged people fall even further. I don't know what your experience is.
Yes. I mean, that's a reality that could happen. I mean, organizations that fully adopt this and really build it into your culture, those that are actively disengaged are going to fall out somehow. Whether they move on from the organization or they fall further behind, there's going to be changes that are going to happen. And in terms of the resurveying, best practice is anywhere from that 9 to 18 month window after your initial, because you want to give yourself enough time to make some progress and gain some traction. And so that notion of resurveying near the end of 2018 is right in the middle of that window for tracking that change. So.
Yeah, I would say I think I'm surprised by how poorly we did, how poor the results are, and we certainly have some room to improve. I think the only 2 departments that did very well are health and building inspection and neighborhood services. And us elected officials, we seem to think everything's great of us who are surveyed on page 11. I don't think we count as our full-time employees do. So yeah, and then with that, we've talked about how we're gonna resurvey and what specifically can we do to improve employee engagement, or is that something that we need to come up with, something we need to discuss further? I'm looking at either one of you to answer.
Well, I think as I mentioned before, just having the regular dialogue with people, and then communicating, as Jenna had indicated, the expectations with people. A little while later, I'm going to talk about the pay for performance program and the core values and core competencies. I know there's a lot of angst of the changes that are going on with that performance review program, and people are not sure where we're going with that. So as we're able to lay that out for people, I think they'll grow in that understanding of the expectations. And as we continue to talk more and more and implement more parts of the strategic plan, I think that will assist with that also. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the steps that have taken place since conducting the survey are moving you in the right direction. So it like Rebecca mentioned, it's about that dialogue and having the opportunities to have some conversations with your employees that you may not otherwise have, and making it a priority. And so those are the things that, it's amazing the small things that can happen that can have a significant impact when we're talking about employee engagement and moving that number upward.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns from the committee members?
Thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And then moving on to our next agenda item is the pay for performance progress.
So Jenna is working with us on this also. So I just wanted to put together a timeline. So I know people are getting anxious about when can I get a raise, when can I possibly get a bonus, when can I get paid more, and things like that. So just wanted to let the committee and also the greater employee group know where we are with that, and talk about some initial decisions we're going to have to be bringing before you in the next week or so. So earlier this year, we worked with our service delivery action team to come up with a list of core values and competencies. I believe that I had shared that with this committee earlier, a few months ago. Been also sharing that with the department heads, the clerical task force, the police and fire commission, and then tomorrow night I'm meeting with the library board to bring those, so that anyone that had any comments or suggestions for improvement or concerns would have the opportunity to bring those up at some point. I haven't received too much feedback on that at this point. So like I said, tomorrow night will be before the library board. Right now, Jenna and I are working on putting together a draft of a pay for performance program, and also working with the HR department to implement the NeoGov Perform software solution that allows this to be an electronic type process. So one of the real good benefits for that is HR doesn't have to be making copies and put things in people's files and reminding, and you know, a lot of staff time was spent with that. Another thing that's really helpful with the software program is throughout the year, supervisors can put in the software. They could have done this in their paper, but this may hopefully make it a little easier for them to put the positive and the negative, because I think a lot of times when people have performance reviews or they're rated on their performance, there's a feeling that maybe it's just like the last 3 weeks or month of their performance that's being reviewed. If there was something really bad that just happened, that's how they're rated, or something really good. So this allows kind of a broader picture. So we're working on that. Then, as I had mentioned before, on next Tuesday, I would like to bring before this committee and the council for consideration and adoption the core values and competencies, because that's what we're building the program upon. And then the next item I have listed is a consideration of a score recognition program. So this is a little different. We have an employee of the month program for City Hall. We like to branch that out to the greater organization, but one of the things and make it part of the pay for performance program. But because it's an employee of the month program, we're going to be starting that in January. So I wanted to bring this to the council for consideration as a policy next Tuesday. It is based on the core values, which we have. The score is what we have for core values: service excellence, continuous improvement, open and transparent, renewal, and equitable. So basically, through this Employee of the Month program, you would be able to recognize one of your peers if they met one of those core values during the previous month or so, and then you would nominate them, and then we would, the mayor and I would look through those and establish winners to that month. Right now, people get a little trinket. They get a pin, and then maybe a mug or a t-shirt or a pen. We'd like to expand that to some type of minimum monetary for the monthly. And here they also get a parking spot. Yeah. So perhaps some type of minimal gift card, $10, $25, something that they could receive. If it's an exceptional, maybe a day off. That's really of no cost to the city, a vacation day. But then at the end of the year, we would identify the top 3 performers of each month. And we'd pick the first, second, and third. And this is where I wanted to get some feedback from the committee, thinking to truly make this part of the Pay for Performance program. I believe that we should put a significant monetary value of perhaps, $250, $500, or $750, first, second, and third, or start at $1,000, $750, and $500. But before I went through the exercise of developing that in the next few days, I wanted to get some feedback from the committee as far as how they felt about that.
Yes, that's what I say. What's the rest of the committee say?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, employee of the month. So there'd be an employee of the month at Public Works. There'd be an employee of the month at City Hall. There'd be an employee of the month at the library. One at police. One at fire. So the people, I'm not gonna say they're competing, but they're all in the same. That's how we're breaking it up. So we'd have several employees of the month every month.
Right.
Okay. Yeah,
and then there would be 3 people that kind of raise to the top. Now, I know I've had some discussion of whether you should include the represented or not. It's kind of hard to compete with somebody who's able to save someone's life.
Yeah.
So I might, have a version with the represented and one with the non-rep. I don't know if you have a strong feeling about that.
Yeah, or I could say just protectives and non-protectives.
Yeah.
and- yes,
Okay.
that sounds good too.
Okay.
And then, yeah, what about, do we include supervisors or just, or not?
It was going to be my thought that everyone except, no elected officials and not myself, but everyone else could be considered.
Okay, including up to department heads.
Right.
Okay, and, all right.
Unless there's a strong feeling. I mean, they don't need a parking spot here, but
Sure.
I'm sure they wouldn't be too. They want the money if they were eligible for that at the end. So.
I wouldn't call it a strong feeling, but I think department heads should be leaders and shouldn't be in that pool. That's just my thinking. But I don't know. I mean, they're eligible for bonuses, right? Department
Well,
heads.
we'll be
This is-
bringing that
Yeah.
forward to you, and the way that kind of going with that is the department heads will be separate from the employees in that realm of the bonus selection. But
My 2 cents. Not department heads, but
Alderman Lysick.
I agree with Marty. I think the supervisors should be kept separate and handled separately than the rest of the employees. They're gonna be evaluating the employees underneath them, and I think we should leave it at that and leave the mayor and Rebecca and the council to evaluate the department heads and treat them separately.
So is the thought that we would include supervisors up to department head, but not including department head?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
so you will have a policy before you next Tuesday regarding that score recognition program, and then moving on down the timeline, we will be bringing a draft of the complete pay for performance to you at some point in January, and then I would also like the opportunity to just share that with employees and then the different groups, as I mentioned before we do some finalization of that. Employees, I've been doing office hours at different locations, and they're really interested in being able to give feedback on that. So, because I've been mentioning that when I've been meeting with people. So, then we're looking at February, having adjustments to the program based on the feedback, and then direction from this committee, because obviously, you'll, just because people give feedback doesn't mean we'll take all of it. So, and then, so February, March, adoption of the pay for performance, and then March and ongoing, the implementation of that. And as we, present the draft, how that implementation timeline will become more evident with the draft before the committee. So, just the timeliness of this was just to let you know about the core values and competencies, the employee of the month becoming the score recognition program, and then just to give you a basic update. So, and understanding, and then, like I said before, to let other people know where we are with the process. So, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I think you've covered it with the timeline.
Okay.
Hey, Rebecca, I think this is great. Like what you're doing with this, like where this is going. This is excellent.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Yes.
total budget impact is going to be under $5,000, I would think, right? I mean, as far as we're talking about the gift cards, and then if we're giving away some,
Oh,
or is it going to
yes.
be maybe be over 5,000? I guess it depends on what we do for the year ends, right?
Yeah.
If we go to 1,000, 750, and 500, that's 2,250 right there, and then gift cards aren't gonna add up to that. I'm just wondering what the whole budget impact is gonna be.
Yeah, I would think that would be less than 5,000,
Okay.
even 3,000. I mean,
Okay,
we'll,
yeah,
we do have
Mhm.
money set aside
for
in
this, yeah, yeah.
in the budget for this. It also will help with the engagement
Mhm.
and the identifying of people's understanding of the expectations for their jobs too. So
Great, yeah,
Right.
Alderman Lexi.
Are we going to be looking at, permanent pay raises for people that, have outstanding performance? One of the things that we've been talking about in this pay for performance is getting away from the, across the board increase for everyone, where, you know, we say this year or whatever, we say it's gonna be a 2% increase. Our employee's gonna have an opportunity to get, say, a 2.5 or a 3% increase or whatever is set up by the finance committee, and perhaps some people that are poor performers, won't get a 2% increase, they may get 1.5% or something.
So, when we bring the draft in January, that will have components of what you're,
Okay, so
what
that will
you're
be a part of it, it's
describing.
not just gonna be a one-time cash.
No,
pay.
this is
This
just
is
a
separate?
separate,
This is
but-
bonuses we're talking about here,
Yeah.
but we will be talking about earning a raise.
Okay.
right, and this is, you know, this is a bonus, it's a smaller level
Mhm.
bonus.
Mhm.
There'll be, and without going too far into what we've been discussing, but there'll be discussions about pay raises, possible bonuses. A lot of people, there's been a lot of feedback about possible additional vacation days, cause there's some people that would prefer that instead of having more money. People
Mhm.
that start here don't really have a lot of vacation days, so that's more important to them.
Yep.
So,
Great, yeah, thank you. Anything else on that item? And then, we're moving on to the Employee Benefit Committee recommendation timeline.
well, Alderman Chapletski's on the committee, so he's aware of the timeline, but I just wanted to let, the Administration and Finance Committee, know, I know, you are privy to the agendas, but, just to kind of go through where we are. So we'll be having an Employee Benefit Committee next week. Some of the potential discussions are the retiree healthcare weighted premium. In the past, there's been some separation of the active versus the retirees and giving them a little more weight in their premium share that they have. Discussion regarding employee premium share for 2018-19. Right now we have a 10% and 20% premium share. I believe the police contract, they're going to 12 and 20 on March 1st. And that's potential discussion with our fire negotiations too. So we'll be talking about that. And then we've had people requesting as retirees that they wanna, I guess, quote unquote, swing with the actives, where they would pay the active premiums instead of the retiree premium shares, and then be subject to the active benefits. That's another thing we'll be discussing. So there's
Yeah,
drawbacks.
Further complicating things,
Yeah.
right?
Right. So those are some things we'll be talking about at the Employee Benefit Committee. Obviously, that all gets brought back to the Administration and Finance Committee for consideration. And then as a staff, we're also working together to come up with recommendations for the benefits and pay time off strategies. We discussed at our last Employee Benefit Committee that it's probably a better idea for us to come up with kind of a total package of benefits and paid time off and things like that versus, it's all about taking away from the employees, or that's the perception. Maybe we present benefits in a different way. you know, so we're brainstorming, and we'll be bringing a plan to the committee about a total package for the committee's consideration, and then also administration and finance. So in January, we're gonna meet to discuss the recommendations before the committee. Then we'll be coming to meet to adopt and compile the recommendation, and then we're gonna discuss those with the different groups, like I mentioned before, the clerical task force, department heads, wellness committee, police and fire commission, library board. Then the committee will meet and discuss the input we received from various avenues, which I'm quite sure there'll be a lot of input. And then the committee will meet in May to adopt the final recommendations, and then in June we'll bring those to this committee, and in July probably update the policies and procedures and things like this. So this is gonna be a process, not something that is going to happen overnight, and getting people to understand that they'll be communicated, this will be communicated to them is something I've been trying to tell them, and we can't just, your health care is not getting changed overnight, you're not losing your sick leave tomorrow, you know, I've heard all these rumors and things like that, so I'm just trying to get the word out that it's gonna be a process. So that's another reason why I wanted to bring this to this committee, so there's an understanding of that expectation. So I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Looks good to me too. Make my commentary. All right, thanks Rebecca. Then moving
Sure.
on to capital improvement program status and public works building opportunities.
So here's another timeline for you.
Yeah,
This is a
it's 3
native-
timelines, yeah.
native timeline, but selfishly it helps keep me on schedule too.
Yep, very good.
Goals. So, just, this is a draft, subject to change, obviously. I just, and we'll be presenting this to the Public Works Committee, but since I was had this meeting tonight, I thought I would bring it to Administration Finance. So January, we'll be sending out requests to staff and departments for, their capital improvement requests, and they'll be submitting them back to us in February. There's also the facility audit going on, that will review that as part of that committee. And then we're also probably have an update on the progress and completion of the current capital improvement in March. And then March through June, review the requests and put together the 2019 requests, where it says before July 1st and before August 1st. You'll see the asterisks there. I'm gonna probably be requesting a change in the ordinance to change those to August 1st and then September 1st. It's a pretty aggressive timeline for us to have those dates, even August and September 1st, so maybe I'll try to work in a little more flexibility to that. There's an understanding of the need to have this as part of the budget process, but sometimes having specific dates like this, you're just doing something to meet the date versus doing putting together the best program. So maybe I'll put wording, or I'll ask for wording that's more flexible for that, but meets the needs. Then the capital improvement program goes with the budget. We did that process this year. I think as years go on, we'll get, Peggy's been putting a lot of time into that, so we'll get better at that information and putting that together for you. And then just like with the budget, discussions and adjustments in October and November, and then adoption with the budget. And then, one of the requirements is, every 2 years, there's a status report of the approved capital projects, so that we didn't do that last year or this year, so we'll do it in 2018. The other part of number 4, one of the things, and I don't know if Alderman Lysak wants to talk on this, he had asked to have us put together a resolution directing staff to assemble an action plan for replacement of the Public Works facility, and I just wanted to, this will be introduced at the council meeting next Tuesday. I'll go before the Public Works Committee, but also since I was coming before the committee tonight, I just thought I would let you know, and I don't know if you had anything additional you wanted to say on that.
Nothing other than it's, the resolution is co-sponsored by Alderman Barzak and myself, and, we feel that, there is a need, to address the situation at Public Works. Whether it's done right now, that remains to be seen. But I think we have to take a look at it, find out what our needs are, what it will cost us, and then determine if now is the best time to do it. Interest rates are down, so, we're saying this is an opportune time to take a look at this and maybe move forward on it if it's feasible.
Dave needs a new office. Yeah, okay.
Peggy, did you
Sounds
have
good.
anything about the capital? Then that's all,
Great, all right.
if there's any questions.
No, thank you. Anything else properly before the committee? All right, then,
One quick question.
Alderman Weigel, yes,
When's
sir.
the facilities audit? I mean, I see in here when completed. When are we expecting the facilities audit to be done?
So, Mike Lewis stopped by my office on his way out this evening with the big pack of the responses to the RFP. So I think he'll be bringing that to the, Public Works Committee
On
next
Tuesday.
Tuesday, the selection.
Okay.
And so it would commence after that.
And is it like 90 days are we expecting?
I don't know if there was a time frame for completion. They're gonna have to do a lot of review and probably interviews and inspections as part of the process.
Yeah,
So it
there's
could,
physical.
so 90 days is probably
Yeah, probably about right.
yeah.
And nothing happens in December anyways, you know that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So
Anything further? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.